Howdy, it's Kyle counting down the top 25 skylines in North America. I believe a skyline is a very important part of a city. It's the first impression for a visitor. It can often be a source of pride for people who live there. And in this video, I'm going to count down the top 25 ones on the continent. I did a video like this about 4 years ago, and since then there have been many new high-rises go up and many of the skylines have changed as a result. So I did want to update the video based on that, and also my opinions have changed a little bit on a few of them. So let's take a look at the top 25 skylines in North America. Starting off at number 25 is Detroit. Most of the high-rises in the city are pretty old, and there hasn't been a big change to the skyline in many years. There is a big new high-rise project going on, and there will be a big new bridge as well, so that will change the skyline, but for right now, it's just okay. Charlotte is a city that's been growing a lot, and there have been a lot of new high-rises going up. I was just there recently, and there was another one that was just about being completed. So this skyline is much newer than what we just saw with Detroit, but in this case, I think newer is better. Monterrey is the third largest city in Mexico. It's in the state of Nuevo León, not very far from the border with Texas. And this is arguably the most modern city in the country. It's been growing a lot of new companies going there, and the skyline has changed as a result. And I do love how interesting this skyline is. There isn't a huge cluster of buildings, but they tend to follow a line that goes along the topography. In general, Mexican cities are not known for having grand skylines, but I do like Monterrey's. Edmonton, Alberta is the first of several in Canada where it really is a much larger skyline than you would think for the city. The metro area for Edmonton is just over 1 million people, but the skyline makes it look like it's much larger than that. A more densely clustered downtown, maybe a little more of a heat island effect there to stay warm during those winters. It's still really cold. Minneapolis is the larger of the two twin cities, and I do think it has the better skyline of the two. There's some really nice architecture with some of these buildings, and the flat landscape around it makes it really stand out a lot more. And the Minneapolis skyline has more high-rises from the past 50 years than most other cities in the Midwest and the Northeast because the Twin Cities didn't have the same type of economic decline in the 50s and 60s like many of the more industrial cities in the area felt. Perhaps the most disappointing skyline in relation to the size of the city is Los Angeles. And a lot of it is seismic concerns, but more of it is because downtown has never really been the prime neighborhood in the city. And because the metro area is so large, you have several other central business districts throughout the metro, so no one area has all the big cluster of high-rises, and downtown LA really isn't super impressive based on the size of the city. Montreal, Quebec is a city that has height restrictions on its high-rises. The tallest ones cannot exceed the height of Mount Royal, where most of the good photos of the skyline are taken from. But despite none of the buildings being super tall, the overall skyline does look really nice, especially taken from the top of Mount Royal. But just know that your thighs will be on fire by the time you get to the top of the mountain to take these photos. Houston does have a nice skyline, but kind of like LA, it isn't well representative of just how big the city is. To me, there's no one building downtown that really stands out as a really cool building. So from an architectural standpoint, I don't think Houston's is really one of the best, but there is a large number of high-rises and a lot of big companies downtown. But in my opinion, Austin's skyline is better. You don't have the same number of high-rises in Austin, and many of them aren't super tall, but the architecture I think is much more interesting. So Austin already has a really cool skyline, and there are a couple of new really interesting buildings going up right now that will make the skyline look even better. Next up, Cincinnati, a city with a much more established downtown. I like the architecture and the density of downtown. I really like the PNC Tower, which is that white clock tower looking one, and the Great America Tower, which is the tallest one over to the right. So not only do I really like downtown Cincinnati, I think the skyline looks really good as well. Another city with a really impressive skyline relative to its size is Calgary, Alberta, a few hours south of Edmonton. So a really dense cluster of high-rises for a metro of only about 1.25 million people. So that puts it in the same size range in the US as say Memphis and Louisville, who are not going to be in this video. So Calgary showing why density downtown matters. Miami has another skyline that has been changing quite a bit recently. There are a lot of new high-rises going up, most of which are residential condo high-rises. But you also have some business and mixed-use stuff going on right downtown. So a lot of population growth in Miami and the region in general, and the skyline has been growing and changing a lot as well. Denver is another city that has seen a lot of growth, and there's been a lot of new high-rises downtown as well. I've always liked that iconic high-rise that has the weird top. I think they call it the cash register building sometimes. I'm not sure, but when I think of Denver, I think about the high rise with the weird top. And this is another one where, kind of like Austin, you come back in about 10 years and it'll probably be a lot higher on this list. I think Boston has a very classy skyline. None of the individual skyscrapers are super tall, but I think it is fitting for a very historic city. I think Boston's skyline shows that it isn't just about height or density, because there are obviously buildings that are taller and downtowns that are more densely clustered, but I think it is just very fitting for the city and how it all comes together. It looks like a really nice skyline. And kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum from Boston is Dallas. Dallas has more really tall high rises and they light up at night, so it has more of a flashy look. And although I do like Dallas's skyline and I have it ranked high on this list, but I think a lot of it is because of how it lights up at night. But just like the other cities in Texas, many new high rises are going up, and you'll probably see Dallas move up a list like this in coming years. A skyline that's quite a bit different than the rest is Honolulu. And yes, I know that Honolulu isn't part of the North American continent, but I'm including it here anyway. And unlike most of the other skylines in this video, most of these high rises are either hotels or condos. And I love the look of all the really light colored buildings, which is very fitting for a tropical setting. Probably the best skyline for the juxtaposition of the old and new is Philadelphia, with Independence Hall and a lot of old buildings right downtown and some beautiful new high rises as well. And I love the newest skyscraper there. I can't be the only one that thinks it looks like a shotgun standing on its base, or perhaps an arm flipping off New Jersey across the river. Either way, that's as Philly as it gets. Another fast-growing city with a lot of new high rises is Seattle. And of course, the Space Needle is going to stand out, and you can have Mount Rainier in the background. But even in photos where the Space Needle is not featured, it's still a very impressive skyline. But for as many high rises as have gone up in downtown Seattle, there could still be a few more for housing. Perhaps the strangest choice for this video is fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada. And I just love the ridiculousness of this skyline. You have all these crazy looking buildings, you have a fake Eiffel Tower, a fake Empire State Building. There's a Space Needle looking thing. There's always one of these getting blown up, another one going up to replace it. So certainly by no means a traditional skyline, but nonetheless, I think it still looks pretty cool, especially at night. Certainly one of my favorite and perhaps the most photogenic skyline in the country is Pittsburgh. The CBD is just squeezed onto that peninsula, just sitting there posing for all the photos on top of the mountains nearby. And tight geography like that leads to dense construction like this. And that makes for a very nice skyline, and Pittsburgh really isn't that big of a city, so for it to be ranked this high on the list is a good testament to just how cool that geography is. San Francisco, kind of like Seattle, has a lot of new high-rises. They can use a few more as well. For the longest time, the iconic Pyramid was the tallest high-rise in town, but the newer Salesforce Tower towers over it. Most of the CBD is full, and most of the new high-rises are being built south and east of downtown. And don't be surprised if in 20 years the Tenderloin District has several shiny new residential high-rises. Vancouver is kind of a mix between Pittsburgh and Honolulu. The tight space essentially requires that density be high and that many high-rises be built. And just like Honolulu and Miami, many of these high-rises are condos. But with the water and the mountains and the way everything is tightly packed right downtown, I really like Vancouver's skyline. But not quite as nice as the best one in Canada, Toronto. This might very well be the most rapidly changing skyline on Earth. There are a double-digit number of high-rises currently going up in downtown Toronto, and it's quite possible that within the next few decades Toronto will have the most skyscrapers in the world. But as it stands right now, it still is a very impressive skyline for Canada's largest city. The toughest decision I had for this video was where to put Chicago versus Toronto. I think they'll be flip-flopped in 10 years, but for right now I think Chicago's is a little bit better. Not only is the cluster really tight, but there's also some seriously tall skyscrapers there as well. We all know the Willis Tower, although people still call it the Sears Tower. But that's just one of many tall high-rises in Chicago, and it's really cool to just walk around downtown and be surrounded by all these tall skyscrapers. So we all know who's going to be number one, and I know folks from Chicago will often say their skyline is the best because of the architecture. They might not have the same number of high-rises or have the big cluster of the super tall ones, but our architecture is better. But there really is nothing quite like the skyline of Manhattan, and it really is an easy decision for me over Chicago. I think Chicago-Toronto is tough, but New York is clearly much more impressive than Chicago's. It doesn't even matter whether you're talking downtown or midtown, it's still the best. And you really get a sense of scale when you're walking around New York versus Chicago, just for how long you're walking amongst these skyscrapers. It can be a couple of hours. Now, I do prefer the city of Chicago and Toronto to New York, but when it comes to the skyline, New York is still the king. So that's my look at the top 25 skylines in North America. And of course, people might have very different opinions, but regardless of how you look at it, the 25 downtowns here look pretty good. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in learning more about geography. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King, signing out. I'd like to give a special thanks to my superior patrons for their support, especially Paul S. If you're interested in purchasing a pin for the viewer pin map or just to support the channel, check out my Patreon page, link in the description. And as always, thank you very much.